Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a special U.S. Chamber of Commerce Now+Next webinar on countering ransomware. We're thrilled to be able to welcome back to the Chamber Secretary of Homeland Security, Ali Mayorkas, to talk about an issue of critical importance to the business community and the government. This program is focused on America's small businesses and will move the conversation beyond a discussion of the threat of ransomware and provide specific guidance and resources on how small businesses can prepare, protect, and respond to these attacks. Our goal is for attendees to leave this one-hour discussion with a sense of where they can find readily available resources to protect their businesses from ransomware. A great example of this is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's ransomware guide, which is available online at www.cisa.gov/ransomware. Secretary Mayorkas will discuss why ransomware is one of his top priorities and the focus of his department's first sprint, why ransomware is a national security priority, and why this is an issue for small businesses. In fact, it's not a stretch to say that ransomware can pose an existential threat to small businesses. Ransomware attacks have grown in sophistication and in frequency. The size of ransom demands has increased exponentially, and we're seeing an increase in data exfiltration and not just encryption events. Payment of a large ransom demand could impact the ability of a company to continue as a going concern. Similarly, the theft of customer or proprietary data from a ransomware attack can have serious legal, regulatory consequences and could also cause a loss of public trust. These issues and more will be covered in a panel discussion in the second part of our program, which focuses on business preparedness and resilience. Pete Marta will lead a conversation on the threats to individual companies, the thinking they should do, what procedures they should have in place, and what relationships they should make before they're hit with a ransomware attack. Audience questions are welcome and encouraged throughout the program. Please submit your questions in the chat function, and we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. We also have some live questions for you to answer as the program unfolds. So to get things started, we're posting our first question, and that is, do you consider ransomware an existential threat to your business or more of a nuisance? We're inviting you to share your thoughts. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Honorable Alejandro Mayorkas. As the nation's 7th Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Mayorkas brings qualified, experienced leadership to the department at a critical time. He has an extensive background in national security, cybersecurity, emergency management, immigration, and law enforcement issues, an extensive knowledge of the department he leads, and a proven track record of collaborating across all levels of government and with the private sector. As Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security in the Obama administration, Ali worked with a broad range of stakeholders to increase awareness of the importance of cybersecurity to America's small and mid-sized businesses. He has been a key partner and resource for the Chamber, and we're pleased to continue our strong working relationship with him and with his team. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the program, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend with us. I know you have to be in many places at once, so we really appreciate it. Look forward to hearing your opening thoughts.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much for having me participate in today's really important conversation. Really, my opening remarks will place an exclamation point on Chris Roberti's opening remarks regarding the threat that ransomware poses to small businesses and, quite frankly, to our homeland security, which is why it is one of our most significant priorities right now. Let me first just express my gratitude to Chris, both personally and professionally. Chris and the Chamber are friends and extraordinary partners, not only in achieving our cybersecurity mission, but achieving the mission of the Department of Homeland Security across the diverse set of threats that we face. There are two reasons in addition to that partnership that I wanted to join the discussion today, and I know everyone is looking forward to listening to the panel of experts that will follow. One is the gravity of the threat that ransomware poses to our homeland security, and two is the criticality of the small business community with respect to that threat and, quite frankly, its criticality more broadly. We recognize and we appreciate that the fact that small businesses comprise the backbone of our nation's economy. And it is perhaps for that very reason that individuals who seek to pose a threat to our nation, who employ cyber tools, and particularly ransomware, as the vehicle for realizing that threat, target small businesses as extensively as they do. As a matter of fact, small businesses comprise approximately 1/2 to 3/4 of the victims of ransomware at this time. Moreover, more than $350 million in victim funds were paid as a result of ransomware in this past year. And our rate of ransomware attacks has increased over the prior year by more than 300%. In order to address ransomware, one must be educated and informed with respect to not only how to detect the threat, but also how to respond to it and how to remediate from it, should, unfortunately, our efforts to prevent the attack from occurring in the first instance do not succeed. Chris mentioned our ransomware guide published by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency within the Department of Homeland Security, which is a wonderful tool for all of you to access to better understand the ransomware threat landscape and what you can do about it. We in the Department of Homeland Security are uniquely situated to assist you and to partner with you in battling ransomware and the threat it poses. Not only is our Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency well poised to assist you, but so is the United States Secret Service, another agency within the department. We stand at the ready to provide education, to provide vital information, to assist you in navigating through what you perceive to be a threat, to assist you in perhaps building the defenses should a ransomware attack seek to exploit your vulnerabilities. And of course, importantly, to guide you in plugging those vulnerabilities in the first instance. We pride ourselves in the Department of Homeland Security of being a department of partnerships. And we look forward to partnering with the backbone of the American economy, small businesses from coast to coast and border to border, to really block ransomware attackers, to be resilient to other cybersecurity threats, and to strengthen the economy and our well-being as a result. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to share a few remarks with you. And I know, Chris, that you might have a few questions for me, as might the audience as well. Thank you so much.
Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you for those framing remarks. I think you very clearly and powerfully articulated the importance of dealing with the threat of ransomware, some of the impacts or potential impacts of ransomware, and what the agency and what the department is doing to work collaboratively with others in government, but also with the private sector. And so I do have a couple of questions that I'd love to get a little deeper in on some of those things. And we will, I do have some audience questions that I'll work in as well. So I think the first question that I think could help people understand and really better understand your commitment and your belief in the importance of dealing with ransomware is how did you choose ransomware as the first of your policy sprints that the department is undertaking? I mean, that's of all the issues that the Department of Homeland Security covers, from immigration to, I mean, just there's so many. Ransomware is number one. And I guess a corollary question is, do we think that the ransomware sprint will help to eliminate the threat of ransomware? How should people be thinking about the sprint and its objectives?
Thanks so much, Chris. Let me say that cybersecurity generally is one of our most urgent priorities in the Department of Homeland Security. It is why we took a very well-established grant program, the Urban Area Security Initiative grant program, and dedicated an increased amount of grant funds to battling the cybersecurity threat in the United States, number one. Number two, we developed a series of sprints in the cybersecurity arena, and ransomware is the first sprint because of two important criteria. Number one, the gravity of the threat, and number two, the threat is not tomorrow's threat, but it is upon us. As I indicated in my opening remarks, the losses from ransomware are staggering, and the pace at which those losses are being realized are equally staggering. And so that is why it is our first sprint. And I think what is vitally important is the term of partnership that both you and I have used. We partner, of course, across the federal government, but critically, the public-private partnership is so important because we do have tools and resources that we could provide to small businesses should those small businesses not have the tools and resources to better defend themselves. But we encourage at the same time the development of those tools and resources. One must be able to defend oneself to the fullest extent possible. And one of the great outcomes of this engagement, we hope, is a realization of the gravity of the threat and the fact that no one is inoculated from it. And it is not a matter of eliminating ransomware. It's a matter, quite frankly, of defending against the attackers. And there are defenses that can be built that are tailored to the resources that one can dedicate to them. It is important that one understands, every small business understands, however, that this should be a priority. The term existential was used in describing the threat, and it very well can be an existential threat to one's business. And so it's a matter of equipping and arming ourselves to build the best defense possible within whatever constraints we have, to make sure that those constraints are properly defined. In other words, one's priorities are well tailored to appreciate and respond to the incredible threat that ransomware is, and for all of us to work together to build a collective defense to this threat.
Well, I think that's an important and very important point. And I think you laid out in your opening remarks that 1/4 to 3/4 of the victims are small businesses. And in preparing for this session, I came across an alarming statistic by a cybersecurity company, BullGuard, that stated that 60% of small and mid-sized business owners believe their businesses aren't a likely target of cyber criminals. And, I guess, without beating a dead horse, should companies take comfort in the "we're too small to be targeted" mentality? We're safe in the herd, or are they operating with a false sense of security? I think I know where this is going.
I almost feel, Chris, that if one considers oneself invulnerable to a cyber attack, specifically ransomware, which we're focused on right now, if one considers oneself invulnerable, insulated from it, one probably is putting a bigger target on one's back.
Yeah, I think that's very well stated. Here's a question from the audience. Will the federal government set up a system for small and medium-sized businesses to obtain help when struck by ransomware?
So that's a really important question, and I profoundly appreciate it. A few things, if I may. Number one, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, has a website, and it has information with respect to how it can be contacted, so it can deploy its formidable talent, resources, expertise, and tools to assist a small business, to help a small business defend itself, to be equipped and resourced, number one. Number two, the U.S. Secret Service similarly has a website that one can access and obtain information about how the Secret Service can advise and guide a company in building its defenses that are best suited to its needs, as well as to, quite frankly, its vulnerabilities. Events like this, the Chamber has tremendous resources as well with respect to the provision of information. And we welcome that partnership. Pardon me. We welcome that partnership. And one of the things that we are exploring is also developing a grant program that can reach enterprises that otherwise are outside of our existing grant programs to really raise the bar of cybersecurity throughout the country. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And as you were giving us those thoughts, one of the poll that first poll question that we posed, we got some answers, and out of roughly 600 responses, just under 600 responses, 565 respondents said that they believe that ransomware is an existential threat. 43 said it was not. So we have a very good and very informed audience. So thank you all. That'll make your job, Mr. Secretary, a little bit easier, and hopefully we can create some evangelists out of this event and have those people convince others that they need to be thinking about these issues in a very serious way. Ransomware, again, this is beginning. It really heated up last summer, as the country moved into a shift of working from home and quick adjustments of computer and IT networks to that environment. And it's a really hot topic across government and businesses. Everybody seems to have their own task force on ransomware these days. And I think it's very good and very comforting that the government is looking at this and trying to tackle this a whole government approach. How's the government going to organize itself and then coordinate within the government and then with the private sector? Because a lot of times we hear that people don't know where to go, or should I call one person or should I call the person that I know? How is the government, and what's the role of DHS in leading and collaborating?
So one of our, thank you, Chris. One of our critical mission sets here in the department is, of course, to protect the .gov environment, the civilian government environment. Another critical role that we play, which is central to your question, is the fact that we really lead the public-private partnership. That's what we are so well positioned to do through the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And in that role, we also, of course, through the Secret Service, have a law enforcement agency that responds to cyber attacks as well, and not only advises companies in how best to defend themselves, but critically important as well, pursues the perpetrators of the crimes and seeks to achieve accountability for them. Yes, there are a number of task forces across the federal government enterprise, regrettably in the arena of cybersecurity, and even in the sub-arena of ransomware. There's enough business for everybody. And one of the things that we are doing, of course, is taking an all-of-government approach. And this is where the role of the White House has been so extraordinarily helpful. Ann Neuberger, of course, I hope everyone knows, and the National Security Council plays a vital role in ensuring that all of the parts of government are working together towards the mission set that we all share. I take great pride in the fact that CISA, as the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency is known, is in fact the lead in the public-private partnership and in engaging as we are at this very moment.
Thank you. And I can say, I can vouch that we at the Chamber have very good relationships with you and your team, with the administration, with people on the Hill, and that it's in a way, even though there may be multiple organizations or efforts, it's good that there are those efforts, because the absence of those efforts is much more concerning. So the public-private partnership, we are deeply committed to it, and we are thankful for your firm commitment to it. What I'd like to ask in the time we have remaining, I've got a couple more questions, but you've talked a lot about the importance of partnerships with the business community and law enforcement, which we fully support. I'd also like to get your thoughts on international collaboration and its significance, particularly with respect to ransomware, and if you want to get more general on cybersecurity, that would be welcome.
Of course, Chris. Let me, if I can, just foot stomp one point. One of the remarkable aspects of CISA specifically is that it is focused on assistance, prevention, remediation, resilience. It is not a law enforcement agency in the traditional sense of investigating for the purpose of achieving perpetrators' accountability. CISA is really there to protect the government agencies, the civilian government agencies, and all of you. And I think that is a remarkable thing about CISA. Chris, I have, in the short period of time, in just about 3 months that I've been in office, had quite a series of engagements with my counterparts across the world. And every single one of those engagements has involved a discussion about the cybersecurity threat and ransomware specifically. And that's for the fundamental reason that cybersecurity, including ransomware, knows no boundaries. And so what are best practices? In what ways can we share information? What are the most innovative tools and practices that we can employ? Because in cybersecurity, and Chris, you and I have spoken about this, it's a maxim, but it's a maxim for a reason, because of its truth, that we're only as strong as our weakest link. And that is not only with respect to the domestic environment, but internationally as well.
That's very, very true. And it's good. And I know that international engagement is one of your key priorities. And so the importance of those relationships can't be overstated. I know that the department is beginning another sprint, or it's in the process of that relates to workforce issues. Could you tell us a little bit about why a workforce sprint is a priority?
Thank you, Chris. We play such a vital role in the cybersecurity of our nation that the talent and expertise of our workforce is a vital quality that we take great pride in. And we want that talent and expertise to be lasting and growing and vibrant throughout the years ahead. And for that reason, we're very focused on recruitment. And one of the critical elements of our recruitment efforts is the value and the principle of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we are thinking not only about the cybersecurity threat that we face today, but what will we face tomorrow? Not only looking at and taking pride in the workforce that we have today, but thinking about the workforce that we will have tomorrow. And so we are going to be, I think today is the day that we begin our second sprint, and we're going to be recruiting talent that is already developed. We're going to be helping develop the talent that is just about to bloom, and we're going to be investing in the seeds to grow the talent of the future. It is at all levels, and we take great pride, and we're extraordinarily energetic about this effort, and we intend to execute the most significant hiring initiative that the Department of Homeland Security has undertaken in its history. We're really excited about this sprint, as we are with all of the work that we do in this vital mission set.
Well, that's your enthusiasm and your determination is palpable, and let us know at the Chamber how we can be helpful. We believe that we have to grow the workforce, and we have to get, like you said, people who are ready to go, people who need a little bit of training and background, and those who we can get ready even in the future. So that's a fantastic and very noble project, and we'd love to be a part of it. Secondly, finally, I guess, I know your time is precious, but I did want to ask you, is there anything that you would like in closing attendees to leave this event with? What would the one thing be from your perspective?
The threat is real. The threat is upon us. The risk is to all of us. Inform oneself, educate oneself, and defend oneself. And if one does not feel one has the information, the tools, or the resources, contact us.
Well, Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your time, for your thoughts. That's an excellent transition to our next panel discussion on countering ransomware. We really appreciate your time, and we wish you and your team much success as you tackle the myriad of challenges that you face on our behalf.
Thank you so much, Chris. Great to partner with you as always.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Chris. Very interesting and important conversation. As Chris said, we're now going to transition to a panel discussion to tease out these topics a bit further. But first, we'll do some quick introductions. I'll start. I am Pete Marta. I'm a partner in the privacy and cybersecurity practice at Hogan Lovells, based in New York. I advise clients on the full spectrum of cybersecurity matters, everything from pre-breach planning to navigating incidents when they happen, to post-breach regulatory investigations, and these days, increasingly litigation. Prior to joining Hogan Lovells, I worked at JPMorgan Chase for several years as an in-house cybersecurity attorney, and before that, I served in the U.S. intelligence community. Eric, can I pass it to you?
You sure can. Thanks so much, Pete. It's great to be here, and really thanks to Chris and Vince and the whole Chamber team for pulling this together. I'm Eric Goldstein. I am the Executive Assistant Director of the Cybersecurity Division within CISA, which our Secretary very kindly referenced several times. So I have the privilege of leading the team that is accountable for providing the guidance, the assistance, the support to organizations across the country who are determining how to most effectively manage, prevent, and respond to cybersecurity risks.
David?
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here. My name is David Smith, Special Agent in charge of the Criminal Investigative Division here at Secret Service Headquarters. The Criminal Investigative Division, or CID, is pretty much the investigative hub of the Secret Service here at headquarters in Washington, D.C. We have our 44 cyber fraud task forces, which are the hubs in their respective regions throughout the field. But CID is pretty much that air traffic control tower, if you will, here at Secret Service Headquarters. Happy to be with you here again. Back to you, Lisa.
And Lisa.
All right. Thank you, David. I appreciate the introduction there. So my name is Lisa Wallace. I am located down in Tampa, Florida. I'm the Area Vice President of the U.S. Public Sector Security Sales Program for Splunk. I've spent the past 20 plus years of my career in the information security space, leading and mobilizing sales teams, as well as consulting customers and partners on how best to align and establish industry best practices from both a policy and enforcement perspective. Very happy to be here and be a part of this incredible group. So thank you.
Thanks to all of you. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. I'll kick us off by briefly providing some further background and context on this topic, and then we'll pose some questions to the members of the panel. Let me start out by talking about a few trends we've seen over the past, say, year plus. These include increased frequency of cybersecurity attacks, increased sophistication of threat actors, and really increased amounts demanded of victim companies. Interestingly, while the pandemic has definitely had an impact on this type of criminal activity, and it certainly helped the threat actors significantly, these trends really did predate COVID. Much of what we're seeing today began with the Maze variant of ransomware, which we saw first in October or November 2019. So let me take the trends one at a time. First, the increased frequency of these attacks. As the Secretary and Chris mentioned, these attacks have been around for several years now, but I don't think any of us could have predicted what we're seeing today. This really is an epidemic. Companies are getting pummeled by these attacks. At Hogan Lovells, we have 2 or 3 of these events coming in on a weekly basis. And of course, they never arrive at convenient times. It's often Friday or Saturday nights or right before the holidays. Some of these attacks make it into the news, but many do not. And I think the key point here, at the risk of being repetitive, is that any company can be a victim. Or perhaps I should say any company will be a victim at some point. One of the biggest mistakes we see companies make is the belief that they aren't a potential victim, either because they're not in an industry likely to be attacked, they think, or they aren't the biggest player in their industry. That is wrong thinking. Many of these threat actors, of course, are just criminals, and they want to get paid. And they don't care if their victim is a global financial institution or for example, a small widget manufacturer. They just want to get paid. And in fact, it's more likely that the widget manufacturer will get hit, in fact, because it unquestionably has fewer defenses in place. Second trend is the increased sophistication of threat actors and what you could call the morphing of fairly basic ransomware attacks a couple years ago, which were really just encryption events, to what we're seeing today, which is a full-blown data breach. What we see today is often threat actors will compromise an organization's defenses. They'll spend time on the infrastructure, sometimes weeks. They'll locate and they'll exfiltrate the most important sensitive data. And then the last step is they'll drop the malware. So now the organization, the threat actors have 2 points of pressure to convince a company to pay. One, it's encrypted the victim's files, but 2, it's often has stolen large amounts of sensitive information about the company's customers, business records, employees, etc. And the final trend is the amounts demanded. So if we were having this conversation a year and a half ago, we'd be sharing anecdotes about businesses paying a few $100,000. Today, the demands that we're seeing are often in the tens of millions of dollars. And again, that's not only to the largest companies. So those are some of the trends. Why don't we move to some of the questions of the panel? Eric, can we start with you? Despite the threat environment that we've been talking about today, many companies still view cybersecurity as a cost that hits their bottom line. I would argue, and I suspect you'd agree with me, that it should be viewed as an investment. How can cybersecurity professionals justify the importance of investing in cybersecurity to business leaders?
Yep. Thanks so much, Pete. That's a great question. You just noted some of the really extraordinary costs imposed upon businesses from ransomware attacks. And in fact, Chris noted in his opening that we've seen businesses actually go out of business due to a ransomware attack. And this is a horrible trend for our country and for the impacted organizations. But at the same time, for cybersecurity professionals, it presents an opportunity. Because one challenge that we have in cybersecurity is quantifying and making tangible the impacts of our insecurity. And so oftentimes with something like a traditional data breach, we know that we want to prevent it. We know that it can impose costs, either mitigation, reputational, regulatory, but the costs are still a bit intangible, a bit hard to really wrap your arms around. And from a real world perspective, sort of hard to understand. We don't have that problem with ransomware. With ransomware attacks, we have real physical, actual impacts that affect everyday people who are trying to go to school, to go to the hospital, to access a good or service provided by an American company. And so the first thing is really tying investments back to the actual risks that have affected so many companies throughout this country. And unfortunately, the ubiquity of ransomware at this point means that no matter what sector of the economy your company operates in, there are undoubtedly ransomware victims in your sector who you could point to and say, here is the nature of the risk. Here is the kind of thing that could happen to our company and to our organization. And the second piece of this is, most, and we'll get more to this as the panel goes on, but unlike some types of cybersecurity incidents, some types of intrusions that may use really elegant, exquisite, sophisticated exploitations that use never before seen vulnerabilities, that's usually not what we see with ransomware attacks. With ransomware attacks, we usually see these criminal gangs just looking for targets of opportunity, where they say, here is a vulnerable device that's sitting on the internet. Here is a internet exposed server that's using woefully outdated software, and then using that or sending phishing emails. So we know that we have on the one side very easily explainable concrete risks that can actually cause, in the worst cases, loss of life. And we have a fairly constrained set of investments that we can make from a cybersecurity best practices standpoint that will significantly buy down those risks. And so aligning the reality of the experience of many organizations and companies in this country with the relative simplicity of these sorts of best practices that we know make a difference here. And as our secretary noted, many of those practices are noted at cisa.gov/ransomware. That join can be really effective in making a strong argument, Pete, as you noted rightly, for why this needs to be a necessary business investment at the highest level of every company in America right now.
Thanks, Eric. Great points. David, can I go to you for a minute now? When I'm engaged in the early hours of an incident, one of the first issues that I address with clients is engaging U.S. government partners. Occasionally, when I do that, a client will resist a bit and express concern that, for example, law enforcement might take over their investigation, might begin to investigate my client. And for clients in regulated industries, perhaps share that information it learns from the company with that client's regulators. Can you address these concerns and explain some of the benefits of calling law enforcement when experiencing an incident, but also perhaps even before an incident occurs?
Of course, Pete, thanks for that. I like to use analogies, as the audience will come to learn real soon. I have a family. We plan for fires. My family knows where the two collapsible ladders are in the house, so that if a fire occurs, we're not, wasting time trying to think of those initial actions. We already have some initial first steps in order to protect ourselves. There's no difference here in regards to an incident response type situation with ransomware. I hear these concerns a lot regarding contacting law enforcement quite a bit. I just wanted to dispel a couple of myths and then go into another analogy. The Secret Service's primary responsibility in a ransomware incident or network intrusion incident is to first stop the bleeding. We do this in concert with an organization's internal network intrusion folks. A little known fact, there's a very small group of technical experts out there that make this their life's work. And a lot of the folks that work for large companies, network intrusion, incident response teams are former Secret Service personnel. So there is an organic connection between the groups. Again, first step is to stop the bleeding, make sure the mitigation is in place so that we can in turn start following the money and bring the perpetrators to justice. Because at the end of the day, we are a law enforcement entity and we're looking for attribution as it relates to the unauthorized access to a victim's network. We're not a regulatory body, so there's no evidence that the Secret Service is sharing any information with any regulatory entities or employing any punitive measures against victims. The analogy I like to bring up in regards to ransomware is, we have some violent crimes that, we tend to have a more visceral reaction to violent crimes as citizens. And the analogy I like to give is if a person is carrying out violent crimes and the victims have a sense of shame or they're concerned about victim blaming and they're less likely to come forward, that puts law enforcement in a less desirable situation because you don't have the information to take action on. So what I will tell people is the more information you can give the Secret Service or law enforcement, the better equipped we are to find these people, apprehend them, take them out of the equation, and to protect you as the victim.
Thanks, David. We're getting a lot of great questions in. Lisa, can I go over to you? Not to get too technical here, but having a better understanding of how these incidents happen and what techniques these criminals are using would be helpful, I think. Can you talk for a minute about the common threat vectors, how threat actors are gaining access to victims' infrastructure to launch these attacks?
Absolutely. So to start, I would say that 65% of all ransomware attacks are delivered via phishing emails. So I would say that phishing emails is certainly the best place to start. They contain malicious attachments or links that unknowledgeable users will click on unknowingly. There's also drive-by downloading. So situations where users are unknowingly going to an infected website, and then malware is downloaded and installed on the end user device without them understanding what's actually happening. So ransomware is just it's a malware variant that encrypts files. It's spread through similar methods and has also spread through social media, such as web-based instant messaging applications. And there's newer methods of ransomware as well that we're observing. So for example, vulnerable web servers that haven't been patched and may have been exploited. So that gives threat actors access to the network to be able to wreak havoc. So I would say the biggest place to start really is educating your end users and helping them to understand simple things like social engineering and emails that may look somewhat different or out of sorts, right? Teaching them kind of what to look for. So just the basics and keeping endpoint protection up to date, email security, backups current, servers patched, tight firewall policy, things like that, centralized management and logs of your assets, being more proactive at protecting end users, I think, from hurting themselves through education, policy, and enforcement. That's the advice I would give.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Eric, maybe going back over to you on the topic of investment in cybersecurity. You and I both worked for several years in the financial sector for two large organizations with very large cybersecurity budgets. But what about smaller companies? Small to medium-sized businesses with more limited budgets. If they don't have the resources to build a fully mature cybersecurity program, Where can they start, and where can they find resources to help?
Thanks for that, Pete. Great question. So I think there's really two answers. The first answer is most companies in this country should not be trying to build a fully mature cybersecurity program with all of the capabilities and services and personnel and technologies that, Pete, as you noted, a major bank would have or a federal agency would have. That's simply unrealistic. And frankly, trying to develop such an organization and a program without the necessary resources, both initially and then sustained over time, to continuously adapt as risks and technology change, is a recipe for resulting in significant gaps and possible intrusions. And so a preferable strategy would be to understand where the organization is able to deploy some basic capabilities and then work with one of the many third parties, one of the many companies that provide cybersecurity services, including things like managed security services, security operations center as a service, threat monitoring, vulnerability assessment, on down the line, or even relying upon a third-party hosting company like a cloud provider to manage the IT environment for you. That is likely for many companies to be a more effective security strategy than trying to do it all in-house. The second point, particular to ransomware, is, as noted, unlike trying to prevent some of the more sophisticated sorts of threat actors that we see out there, there are some fairly basic steps that organizations can take that will really drive down the risk. And three that I'll call out. The first is just enabling automatic updates on all software that you are using, or if such a feature isn't available, making sure that you deploy patches the moment that they're released. Making sure that the software and hardware that you're using is up to date and doesn't have known vulnerabilities is a critical step. The second piece, as noted by my fellow panelists, is managing the risk of phishing. This can be done certainly by making sure that any anti-phishing measures provided by your email provider are turned on and tuned correctly, but also making sure that the workforce understands how to identify a phishing email, what to do when they receive one, and most importantly, not to click. And then third and finally, focusing on backups, recognizing that the goal of ransomware is to find an organization's crown jewel data and then encrypt it for monetary gain, or as Pete noted, to steal it for monetary gain. Being able to identify your organization's most critical data and then making sure that that information is backed up offline from your main network at sufficient enough recurring intervals that if, heaven forbid, you have a ransomware attack, you are able to, once your network is cleaned up and you're confident that the adversary has been removed, you're able to restore your most critical data from a known good state. That is the most powerful remedy to a ransomware attack. And so if an organization chooses to invest in their own ransomware protections, as opposed to giving that job to a third party, those are three areas where investment will be measurably effective in driving down the risk of ransomware intrusions.
Thanks, Eric. So building on that, Lisa, back to you. What kinds of tools are useful in preventing and responding to ransomware events? How should businesses be thinking about their technology tool set?
So I would say in terms of prevention and enforcement tools, first of all, backup, I think it's critical to, first of all, have some sort of a formal policy that's in place. But we all know that policies are as good as laws. If there's no teeth to it, if there's no way to enforce those laws or policies, they lack impact. So you've got to have well-documented security policy in place that everyone understands and is in compliance with, right? And then you've got to have the enforcement piece, which is the tool set. So prevention by way of enforcement tools, it's important to keep, again, regular backups. And I know we're beating the same drum here of your data, patch your servers, updated endpoint security, alignment with more of a zero trust model, which I think everybody is really aware of and really looking into now and hyper-focused on. It's also critical to maintain, centralize as much as you can, to be agile and nimble in terms of maintaining a current and protected network, keeping everything patched and up to date in terms of your systems, your applications with the latest protections to prevent vulnerabilities against exploits, data leakage, and of course, ransomware.
Thanks, Lisa. Greg, back over to you. David, back over to you. We all know that attribution is inherently challenging in cyberspace. One question I commonly get from clients is whether these criminals will eventually be brought to justice. Can you comment on law enforcement's efforts to identify and prosecute the various threat actor groups you're seeing these days?
Yes, I can, Pete. In a recent interview of a person we brought to justice, they actually brought this up to us, and I'd like to give the audience some real life information. The person said to us, the Secret Service, that they never thought that the Secret Service and foreign law enforcement would be as coordinated or communicative as they needed to be in order to bring them to justice. So they were literally leveraging the fact that they perceived that the communication was not there. Going back to your point of contacting law enforcement to partly answer this question, when we get information on an individual through an organization, that information, that data is maintained and actually helps in the future. No different than, like Mr. Goldstein was saying, some organizations are targeted and aren't safe because the criminals are just trying to get PII and other information for future purposes. So law enforcement has to do the same thing. So we had a situation recently wherein we were taking part in a foreign search warrant and found some digital currency wallet information on an individual's phone. We cross-referenced that information with information we received from a victim of ransomware who paid $1 million. And that pretty much that information was able to link that person to some crime we would not otherwise have been able to do so. So when it comes to attribution, it has to be a group effort. It can't just be law enforcement working in the blind. The more target or victim organizations can share information with us, we can share that with our partners at CISA and other industry partners, the better we are at bringing these bad people to justice wherever they are. Because bad people like to make money to enrich themselves. And even if they're in a country that we don't have the proper relationship with, at some point they like to go on vacation to warm places. And sometimes we have better relationships with those countries, and we can bring them to justice via that route.
Thanks, David. Very interesting. So we've had a bunch of polling going on throughout the conversation. One question has been, if you are the victim of ransomware, do you think you will pay? And we had about 400 responses. Looks like 47 said yes, they would pay. The vast majority said they would not, which is not surprising. When I have clients go through these incidents, it's almost always the case that they start out by saying, no, we don't negotiate with terrorists, so to speak. But it's often the case that after a day or two, reality sets in, and it sometimes can be the right business decision to pay. Maybe this is a question for David or Eric. What percentage of ransomware victims are paying these days, roughly?
So I'll offer a first answer and then hand it off to David, which is it's impossible to say because so many attacks are never reported to the U.S. government. So getting back to one of the fundamental points that we made here is it is extremely hard for us, even as a national cybersecurity community or a national business community, to understand the breadth of the problem. Because we know that many organizations are experiencing these attacks and either paying or not paying and simply suffering through it and aren't asking for help, aren't engaging law enforcement, aren't engaging CISA for help with remediations. And so, because we don't know the true denominator of the risk here, it is very hard for us to offer a percentage. So getting back to, I think, one of David's very well stated points, entities who are impacted by ransomware are victims. And the US government, whether you call the Secret Service, federal law enforcement, CISA, you'll be treated as a victim who needs assistance and help getting back on your feet, and also bringing the perpetrator to some measure of justice. And so the more reporting that we get, the more that we can offer assistance, the more that agencies like David can impose costs on the threat actors, and the more that we'll actually understand the breadth of this risk and have a better sense of how we can drive some broader change and improvement.
David, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I couldn't have stated it any better than Mr. Goldstein. That first point about it's difficult to give a percentage when you know firsthand that you do not have all of the information available because it's not reported to you. An unreported crime is something a law enforcement entity cannot respond to.
Great, well stated. Another question that came in is, in situations like this, you often don't know who the threat actor is, the individual or organization behind the ransom demand. Maybe this is for David. If I'm a victim and a threat actor is saying to me, pay us $1 million and we'll send you a decryption key and we will promise not to sell your data, for example, on the dark web. What's the guarantee that I can believe that these threat actors, who are criminals, will carry out their promises?
So one, you can never trust a threat actor 100%. They do delve into the world of trust to a certain extent. I will say that in order to build their brand, a lot of ransomware groups do, they are proud of their reputations in keeping their word, but that does not mean long-term you can trust that they will not circle back to demand a second ransom. Keep in mind, this has come up several times during this panel discussion. Ransomware groups are not new criminals. These are groups that have combined forces like any group of nefarious actors. You have your hackers, your folks that introduce and create malware, your money launderers, and they pretty much get together and use they're pretty much the best of the best in all of their nefarious skill sets in order to damage organizations and the American public. But at the end of the day, you cannot trust a criminal to be a righteous player, big picture.
Thanks, David. We had another question come in about potential OFAC, potential sanctions violations if a company decides to pay. So quickly, we only have a couple minutes left, but the background there is back in October of last year, OFAC and FinCEN both released guidance around ransomware. And it really was a reminder that if a company decides to pay a threat actor, they almost certainly will not know the identity of the threat actor. There are a few things that you can do to try to conduct due diligence before you make the payment, but it's still very difficult. And the point in the guidance was if a company does decide to pay, there's a strict liability regime in place. If it does turn out that the payment did go to an individual or organization on a sanctions list, that company could theoretically be subject to a sanctions penalty. I think the question remains whether the U.S. government would further punish a victim company like that. But I think an important takeaway from that guidance was, I believe it was OFAC that said a company in that type of situation who made the payment, and it turned out later on that it was to a sanctioned individual, if that company had promptly and thoroughly cooperated with law enforcement, it would view that company more favorably. I believe we're out of time now. So Chris, I will hand it over to you.
Pete, thank you very much. And thank you to our panelists, Eric, David, and Lisa. I think that was a very useful discussion. not only did you provide personal experiences dealing with ransomware and advising clients or helping others, victims, you also, as a panel, provided some very concrete and specific things that companies should be doing and thinking. And we'll have some of those resources in a follow-up email to each of our registered attendees today. So thank you all to our panelists. Thank you very much to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Ali Mayorkas. We covered a lot of ground today, and I trust we provided some information that you can take home and learn from. I hope you'll join us for our next event. It's a cybersecurity conference that we're hosting on May 25th. We've got a great lineup. Again, as I mentioned, details on that event and others will be in the wrap-up email. And with that, this program is concluded. So thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.